My name is Sophie, and I'm 34 years old. I never imagined I'd be sitting at my parents' dinner table again watching my mother's face contort with disgust as she spat those words at me. "You're not even worth a beggar." The room fell silent. Relatives froze with forks midair. My cheeks burned with humiliation. Little did they know what I'd been hiding all these years. Little did my mother realize her words would come back to haunt her in just a few minutes. If you're watching this video right now, let me know where you're tuning in from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I finally stood up to the woman who never thought I was good enough. Growing up in the Matthews household meant one thing: excellence was the minimum expectation. My mother, Dr. Elizabeth Matthews, wasn't just any doctor. She was the head of cardiology at one of Boston's most prestigious hospitals, known for her groundbreaking research and impeccable reputation. My father, Richard Matthews, was a corporate attorney whose client list included Fortune 500 companies and whose name carried weight in legal circles across the East Coast. In our family, success wasn't celebrated, it was assumed. Then there was my younger brother, Brian. 3 years my junior, he was the golden child from the moment he brought home his first perfect test score in elementary school. While I struggled with math and science, Brian seemed to absorb complex concepts effortlessly. By high school, he was already taking college-level courses and winning national academic competitions. Now, at 31, he's a neurosurgeon following perfectly in our mother's medical footsteps. "Sophie, why can't you focus like your brother?" This was the soundtrack of my childhood playing on repeat, through elementary school, middle school, and beyond. My mother's voice always tinged with disappointment, always comparing. I can still remember the day I brought home an A- on my biology test. Most parents would have been proud, but not my mother. She took one look at the paper, noted the single question I'd missed, and said, "This is why you'll never be a doctor." I was 12. What my mother never bothered to notice were the art competitions I won, the graphic design portfolio I was building even in high school, or how computers and technology came naturally to me. When I'd show her my digital art or a website I'd coded from scratch, she'd glance at it briefly before asking if I'd finished my chemistry homework. "Art won't pay the bills, Sophie," she'd say. "You need something practical, something respectable." By the time I reached high school, the distance between my mother and me had grown into a chasm. We lived in the same house but existed in different worlds. Our conversations were limited to her critiques of my academic performance and reminders of how Brian was excelling. The warmth that should exist between mother and daughter was replaced by cold evaluation and constant disappointment. My father, though more gentle in his approach, was rarely home enough to make a difference. When he was, he remained neutral, unwilling to challenge my mother's harsh parenting style. "Your mother wants what's best for you," he'd say after particularly brutal criticism sessions. "She's pushing you because she knows you have potential." But what about what I wanted? What about my potential in fields that actually interested me? These questions went unasked and unanswered in our household. My relationship with Brian was complicated. As children, we'd been close, building forts in the living room and creating elaborate backyard adventures. But as my mother's favoritism became more pronounced, a wedge formed between us. It wasn't Brian's fault that he excelled in the areas our parents valued, but his success became the measuring stick for my failures. By 16, I'd stopped sharing my achievements with my family altogether. The science fair participation medal sat in my desk drawer, never mentioned, while the national design competition trophy I won was hidden in my closet. In the Matthews household, if it wasn't medicine, law, or something equally prestigious, it simply didn't matter. When I turned 18 and graduated high school, I made the decision that would forever alter my relationship with my family. Despite my mother's meticulous planning for my pre-med education at her alma mater, I applied to a different university with a strong digital arts and computer science program. I was accepted with a partial scholarship. The night I told my parents, our house erupted into chaos. My mother's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. "After everything we've invested in you," she screamed, "you're throwing your life away for some computer games and doodles." My father tried to mediate, suggesting perhaps I could double major, but my mother wouldn't hear it. No daughter of mine is going to waste her potential on something so trivial, she declared. Either you go to pre-med as planned, or you're on your own. I chose to be on my own. The next morning, I packed my belongings into my used Honda Civic and drove away from the only home I'd ever known, my mother's final words echoing in my ears, "Don't come crawling back when you fail." The first months of independence were exactly as difficult as my mother had predicted. I moved into a tiny studio apartment with barely functioning plumbing and took whatever jobs I could find. Barista in the morning, retail associate in the afternoon, freelance graphic design work deep into the night. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. But for the first time in my life, I was making my own choices. I enrolled in community college classes to save money, focusing on computer science and digital design. My cramped apartment became my sanctuary, a place where no one judged my choices or compared me to anyone else. The turning point came during my second year of independence. I was designing promotional materials for a local tech conference in exchange for a free admission ticket. That's where I met Jennifer Larson, the keynote speaker and founder of a successful software company. Jennifer had started her business in her garage 10 years earlier and had grown it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. After her talk, I gathered my courage and approached her with my portfolio. I expected a polite dismissal, but Jennifer took the time to look through my work carefully. "You have a unique perspective," she said, pointing to one of my user interface designs. "You're thinking about how people interact with technology, not just how it looks. That's rare." That 15-minute conversation changed the trajectory of my life. Jennifer became my mentor, offering guidance and eventually a part-time position at her company while I finished my degree. Under her wing, I learned not just about design and coding, but about business strategy, leadership, and confidence. "Never apologize for your passion," Jennifer told me once when I mentioned my family's disappointment. "The world doesn't need more reluctant doctors. It needs people who are on fire about what they do." As my skills grew, so did my reputation in the industry. By the time I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I was already receiving job offers from tech companies. I accepted a position at a mid-sized software firm where I quickly advanced from junior designer to project lead. But something inside me wanted more. The entrepreneurial spirit I'd seen in Jennifer had ignited a similar flame in me. After 3 years of working for others, saving every penny and building connections, I took the leap and founded my own company, Nexus Solutions. The beginning was humble. Just me, a business plan, and an innovative idea for integrating artificial intelligence with user experience design. I worked out of my apartment, living on ramen noodles and determination. What my family didn't know, what I deliberately kept from them, was that Nexus Solutions was gaining traction faster than anyone could have predicted. Our first product, an AI-assisted design platform, caught the attention of several major tech companies. By the end of our first year, we had secured 2 significant clients, and I had hired 3 employees. By year 3, Nexus had grown to a team of 20 with offices in a downtown high-rise. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies, and our annual revenue had exceeded 7 figures. A prominent tech magazine had featured me in their 30 under 30 list, calling Nexus Solutions a game changer in human-computer interaction. Yet despite my success, I maintained a modest lifestyle and appearance. I drove the same reliable car, lived in a comfortable but not extravagant apartment, and rarely splurged on designer clothes or luxury items. The wealth I was accumulating went back into the company or into secure investments. Perhaps this was a reaction to years of being told I would fail, or perhaps it was simply my nature, but I found no joy in flaunting success. And I still couldn't bring myself to share any of it with my family. The thought of my mother's reaction filled me with anxiety. Would she dismiss my achievements as luck? Would she find some way to compare my success unfavorably to Brian's medical career? Or worse, would she suddenly take credit, claiming her harsh treatment had motivated me to succeed, so I maintained minimal contact? Occasional phone calls with my father where I would vaguely mention that my job in tech was going well. Christmas cards with generic updates. I skipped family gatherings, always citing work commitments, which wasn't entirely untrue given the demands of running a growing company. Jennifer noticed my reluctance to speak about my family and gently encouraged me to address it. Success is sweetest when shared, she would say, and unresolved family issues have a way of following you no matter how far you run. But I wasn't ready. The wounds were still too raw, the fear of rejection too strong. So I poured myself into growing Nexus, creating a workplace family that provided the support and recognition I'd never received at home. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April, just as I was preparing for a board meeting. My father's name flashed on my phone screen, unusual for a weekday when he would normally be in court. "Sophie," he said, his voice carrying that formal tone he always used when delivering news. "Your great-aunt Teresa is celebrating her 80th birthday next month. Your mother is organizing a family reunion at our house. Everyone will be there." Great-aunt Teresa was my mother's aunt, a kind woman who had always slipped me art supplies as a child, much to my mother's disapproval. I hadn't seen her in years. "I'd really like you to come," my father continued when I didn't immediately respond. "It's been too long, Sophie. The family asks about you." My instinct was to decline to protect myself from the inevitable scrutiny and judgment. But something in my father's voice gave me pause. Was that longing I heard? Regret, perhaps? "I'll think about it." I promised more to end the conversation than out of any real consideration. But the invitation lingered in my thoughts throughout the day, distracting me during the board meeting and following me home that evening. I called Jennifer, who had become not just a mentor, but a close friend over the years. "They're having a family reunion," I explained after recounting the call. "I haven't seen most of them in nearly a decade." "And you're afraid of facing your mother," Jennifer stated matter-of-factly. She never sugarcoated things, which was one of the reasons I valued her advice. "Yes," I admitted. "I'm afraid that no matter what I've accomplished when I'm in that house, I'll be reduced to that inadequate daughter again." Jennifer was quiet for a moment before responding. "You know, Sophie, sometimes the only way past something is through it. Maybe it's time to face these demons, not for your mother's sake, but for your own." She was right, of course. For all my external success, this unresolved relationship still held power over me. I had built a life, a company, a reputation, but the shadow of my mother's disapproval still darkened corners of my confidence. "Besides," Jennifer added with a hint of mischief in her voice, "I'd pay good money to see your mother's face when she realizes her disappointing daughter is a tech CEO." That made me laugh, breaking the tension. By the end of our conversation, I had made my decision. I would attend the family reunion, but I would keep my success close to my chest. I wasn't going to announce it or flaunt it. If the topic of my career came up, I would be vague. This wasn't about proving anything to my mother or seeking her approval. This was about making peace with my past so I could fully embrace my future. The weeks leading up to the reunion were filled with anxiety. I found myself obsessing over what to wear, finally settling on a simple but well-made blue dress that was professional without being showy. I debated whether to drive my modest car or rent something more impressive, ultimately deciding authenticity was more important than appearances. As the day approached, I found myself increasingly preoccupied with memories from childhood. Not all of them were bad. There had been moments of connection with my mother, rare as they were. A Saturday afternoon when she taught me to bake her grandmother's apple pie. The time I had a high fever and she stayed by my bedside all night, her cool hand on my forehead. These memories complicated my feelings, making the clear-cut narrative of the critical mother and wounded daughter more nuanced, more human. The night before I left for my hometown, I barely slept. I rehearsed conversations in my head, imagined various scenarios, and prepared responses to potential criticism. By morning, I was exhausted but resolved. I packed my car, programmed the familiar address into my GPS, and began the 3-hour drive to the past I'd been avoiding for years. As I drove through my old neighborhood, I was struck by how little had changed. The same oak trees lined the streets, their branches now fuller and more majestic. The Martin family still had their perfectly manicured lawn. Mrs. Abernathy's garden was still a riot of colorful flowers. I stopped at the local coffee shop, now trendier than in my day, but still recognizable. As I waited for my order, I heard someone call my name. Turning, I saw Lily Patel, my high school friend who had remained in our hometown, now managing the local library. Our conversation was warm but superficial. I asked about her family. She told me about her recent promotion. She knew I worked in computers, but had no idea of the extent of my success, and I kept it that way. It was a strange feeling compartmentalizing my life so completely, but I wasn't ready to merge my past and present just yet. That night, staying in a hotel rather than my childhood home, I tossed and turned, my dreams filled with distorted images of family gatherings where I was simultaneously invisible and under a microscope. When morning came, I felt anything but rested, but the die was cast. It was time to face my family. The Matthews family home looked exactly as I remembered, a stately colonial with perfect symmetry, manicured hedges, and not a blade of grass out of place. Cars lined the circular driveway, indicating that many guests had already arrived. I parked my modest sedan behind a shiny new BMW, took a deep breath, and made my way to the front door. I didn't need to knock. The door swung open to reveal my father, his hair now more silver than brown, his familiar smile tinged with what looked like nervous anticipation. "Sophie," he said simply, pulling me into an awkward hug. "You look well." The entryway was filled with the buzz of conversation and the clink of glasses. Familiar faces turned as I entered conversations, pausing briefly as relatives recognized me. Aunt Carolyn approached first, her embrace perfumed and enthusiastic. "Look at you," she exclaimed, holding me at arm's length. "All grown up and so beautiful. We've missed you at these gatherings." Others followed, cousins I'd played with as a child, uncles who'd slipped me $20 bills on birthdays, family friends who remembered me from piano recitals and school plays. Their greetings were warm if somewhat cautious, as if they weren't quite sure how to interact with the prodigal niece who had rejected the family's expected path. And then the crowd parted, and there she was. My mother looked older than I remembered, fine lines etched around her eyes and mouth, her posture still impeccable in a tailored navy dress. Her gaze swept over me, assessing, calculating. "Sophie," she said, her voice as crisp and clinical as ever, "you finally decided to join us. No hug, no warmth, just acknowledgement of my presence." I had prepared myself for this, but the reality still stung. "Hello, Mother," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Thank you for including me." Her eyes narrowed slightly, perhaps surprised by my composure. She had expected me to flinch, to cower, to revert to the insecure daughter desperate for approval. But the years of building my company had taught me to stand tall in uncomfortable situations. Before she could respond, my brother Brian appeared with a woman I didn't recognize. He had our father's height and our mother's sharp features, his expression a mixture of surprise and what might have been guilt. "Sophie," he said, stepping forward to hug me. "This is Amanda, my wife. We got married last fall." I hadn't known about the wedding, hadn't received an invitation. The revelation that I had missed such a significant family event should have hurt, but instead it simply confirmed the extent of my exclusion from family affairs. "Congratulations," I said, shaking Amanda's hand. "It's nice to meet you." The initial greetings gave way to the rhythm of the gathering. Drinks were served, appetizers circulated, and conversations flowed around me. I moved through the rooms of my childhood home, feeling like a ghost present, but somehow not fully there. Every so often, a relative would corner me with questions about my life. "So, Sophie, what are you doing these days?" My cousin Marjorie, now a successful pediatrician, asked over white wine. "I work in technology," I replied, the practiced vagueness ready on my tongue. "Oh, what kind of technology?" she pressed. "Software development and design," I said, offering just enough information to satisfy without revealing the extent of my success. "Is there good money in that?" Uncle Robert chimed in, always concerned with practical matters. "I do all right," I said with a small smile, perhaps the understatement of the year. The questioning continued throughout the afternoon, becoming increasingly uncomfortable as relatives compared notes on their children's accomplishments. Cousin David's son had just been accepted to Harvard Medical School. Aunt Patricia's daughter had made partner at a prestigious law firm. And Brian, of course, had recently published a groundbreaking paper on a new neurosurgical technique. My vague answers about working in tech seemed to confirm what many already believed, that I was the family disappointment, the cautionary tale of potential squandered. I could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent comparisons, the pity poorly disguised as polite interest. As we gathered around the elaborately set dining table for dinner, I found myself seated between a second cousin I barely remembered and an elderly great-uncle who was hard of hearing. Across from me sat Brian and Amanda, and at the head of the table my mother presided like a queen surveying her court. The first part of the meal passed in a blur of forced small talk and careful navigation of potentially contentious topics. I picked at my food appetite, diminished by the tension I felt coiling inside me. Then, as dessert was being served, my mother tapped her glass, commanding attention. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate Aunt Teresa's milestone birthday," she began, smiling at the elderly woman of honor. "Family is everything, and seeing all the achievements represented around this table makes me prouder than words can express." She proceeded to highlight various family members' recent accomplishments, lingering particularly on Brian's medical breakthroughs and academic honors. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, genuine, in a way I had rarely heard directed at me. Then, almost as an afterthought, her gaze shifted to where I sat. "And Sophie is here too after many years away. She's working with computers, I believe." The dismissive tone, the deliberate minimization, the pointed contrast with the glowing accolades she had just bestowed on others. It was all so familiar, so expected, and yet it still had the power to wound. I might have let it pass, might have simply nodded and let the moment go, but my mother wasn't finished. "It's such a shame," she continued, her voice taking on a performative quality of regret. "Sophie had such potential. She could have been anything, done anything worthwhile. But she chose to walk away from all the opportunities we provided." The table fell uncomfortably silent. A few relatives shifted in their seats, eyes darting between my mother and me. "Elizabeth," my father said quietly, a warning in his tone. But my mother, perhaps emboldened by wine or simply unable to resist the audience, pressed on. "We gave her every advantage, the best schools, the best tutors. And what did she do with it? Threw it all away to play with computers while her brother saves lives." I sat perfectly still, feeling every eye on me, the humiliation burning through my chest. Part of me wanted to stand up and leave, to walk out of this house and never return. But another part, a stronger part I had developed over years of building my company from nothing, refused to retreat. Before I could respond, my mother delivered the final blow, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You know, Sophie, there are beggars on the street with more ambition and drive than you've shown. You're not even worth a beggar." The words hung in the air like poison. A few audible gasps broke the silence. My father's face had gone pale, his mouth open in shock at the cruelty of the statement. Even Brian looked stunned, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. I felt a curious calm settle over me, a stillness born not of defeat but of absolute clarity. This moment, this horrible crystalline moment, was exactly why I had kept my success a secret. Nothing I could have achieved would ever be enough. No accomplishment would ever satisfy the impossible standards my mother had set. I was about to excuse myself from the table when a young voice broke the heavy silence. "Wait, are you the Sophie Matthews from Nexus Solutions?" All heads turned toward my teenage cousin Alex, his face alight with sudden recognition, his phone in his hand. And just like that, everything changed. The question hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into the suffocating tension. Alex, 16 and tech-obsessed, was staring at me with wide eyes, his earlier boredom replaced by excitement. "I just read an article about you in Tech Innovators magazine last week." He continued, oblivious to the frozen tableau around him. "You're the one who developed that AI integration platform, right? The one that's revolutionizing personalized user experiences." I could feel the shift in the room, the confusion, the disbelief. My mother's face had gone from smug superiority to uncertainty in an instant. Brian was looking between Alex and me with furrowed brows. For a brief moment, I considered downplaying it, minimizing my achievements, as I had been doing all day. But looking at my mother's face, seeing the first crack in her armor of condescension, I decided the time for hiding was over. "Yes," I said simply. "That's me." Alex's face lit up even more. "That is so cool. Your company is worth millions now, right? I saw your TED Talk about ethical AI development. It was amazing. I've been telling everyone I want to intern at Nexus when I start college." The silence around the table had transformed from uncomfortable to stunned. My Aunt Patricia was the first to recover. "Sophie, is this true?" she asked, her voice betraying her shock. "You own a technology company." I nodded, maintaining my composure, even as I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. "Yes, I founded Nexus Solutions 6 years ago. We specialize in AI-enhanced user experience design and have clients across multiple industries." "But," my mother interjected, her voice strained, "you said you were just working with computers. You never mentioned owning a company." "You never asked," I replied evenly. "You assumed." Alex, still riding his wave of excitement, was scrolling through his phone. "Look, here she is," he announced, turning his screen to show the table a professional photograph of me from the magazine article, standing in front of the Nexus headquarters, looking every inch the successful CEO. "It says here that Nexus Solutions is valued at over $30 million and is considered one of the most innovative firms in the industry." The photograph made its way around the table, passed from hand to hand like a sacred artifact, expressions of disbelief transforming into awe as relatives connected the successful woman in the image with the person sitting at their table. "But why didn't you tell us?" my father asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and what sounded like hurt. I looked directly at my mother as I answered. "Would it have mattered? Would it have been enough?" My mother's face had drained of color. The hand holding her wineglass trembled slightly. For the first time in my memory, she seemed at a loss for words. "There's a video interview, too," Alex announced, still happily oblivious to the underlying currents. He tapped his phone, and suddenly my voice filled the dining room, discussing the future of AI integration and Nexus's vision for human-centered technology. As the video played, showing me confidently addressing complex technical concepts, I watched the expressions around the table transform. There was surprise, of course, but also something else, something I had never seen directed at me from my family: respect. My brother Brian was the first to break the silence after the video ended. "Sophie, this is incredible," he said, his voice genuine, but also tinged with something that might have been regret. "Why didn't you ever mention any of this when we spoke?" "We haven't really spoken in years, Brian," I replied gently. "Not about anything meaningful." The truth of that statement seemed to hit him hard. He nodded slowly, acknowledging the distance that had grown between us. Questions began to flow from around the table. How had I started the company? What exactly did Nexus do? Had I really met the tech industry leaders mentioned in the article? Was that really the governor in one of the photos? I answered each question calmly, neither boasting nor diminishing my accomplishments. As I spoke about Nexus, about the team I had built and the vision we were pursuing, I felt myself standing fully in my power, perhaps for the first time in my family's presence. Throughout the conversation, my mother remained uncharacteristically silent, her expression unreadable. The transformation in how others were treating me was immediate and dramatic. Uncle Robert, who had earlier asked condescendingly if there was good money in my work, was now asking if I would consider looking at his son's resume. Cousin Marjorie, the successful pediatrician, who had seemed so patronizing earlier, was now asking for my business card. Even Amanda, Bryan's wife, whom I had just met, was looking at me with new interest, mentioning that her hospital was looking to improve their patient interface systems. As the initial shock wore off, and the conversation began to normalize around my newly revealed status, I excused myself to get some air. The sudden shift from family disappointment to success story had been more emotionally draining than I had anticipated. Standing on the back porch, breathing in the cool evening air, I heard the door open behind me. I expected my father, perhaps even Brian, but when I turned, it was my mother standing there, her posture stiff, her expression still difficult to read. For a long moment we simply looked at each other, two women who shared blood, but had never truly understood one another. Then, surprisingly, she spoke first. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice was quieter than I was used to hearing it, lacking its usual edge of judgment. "Would you have believed me if I had?" I asked, not unkindly. She didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. "All these years," she said instead, "I thought you were struggling, wasting your potential." "I know," I replied. "That's what you wanted to believe." Her eyes flashed with a hint of the old defensiveness. "I wanted you to succeed, Sophie. Everything I did was to push you toward success." "No," I said firmly. "You wanted me to succeed on your terms in ways you could understand and approve of. When I chose a different path, you decided in advance that I would fail." She opened her mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, she was actually listening to me. "Do you have any idea what it felt like? I continued to hear you say I wasn't worth a beggar to be humiliated like that in front of our entire family. That wasn't about wanting me to succeed. That was about punishing me for not conforming to your vision." To my shock, I saw my mother's eyes glisten with what might have been tears. In all my years, I had rarely seen her cry. "I didn't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you were throwing your life away." "You didn't ask," I replied. "You assumed the worst because it fit your narrative about me. You never once considered that I might be capable of success on my own terms." We stood in silence for several moments, the weight of decades of misunderstanding between us. "I'm proud of you," she finally said, the words sounding foreign on her lips. "What you've accomplished, it's remarkable." The words I had longed to hear for so many years. Yet now that they had come, I found they didn't hold the power I had once given them. My self-worth was no longer tied to my mother's approval. "Thank you," I said simply. "But I didn't do it for your pride. I did it because it was what I loved, what I was good at. I built Nexus for myself, not to prove anything to anyone else." Something shifted in her expression, then a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps recognition, perhaps regret, perhaps even a grudging respect. "You always were stubborn," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I wonder where I got that from," I replied, allowing my own small smile in return. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't a magical reconciliation or a Hollywood ending. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had stood between us for so long. As we turned to go back inside, I knew that our relationship would never be simple or easy, but perhaps it could become something new, something built on truth, rather than expectations. As my mother and I re-entered the dining room, I noticed Brian standing near the doorway, clearly waiting for an opportunity to speak with me. The look on his face was complex, a mixture of admiration and what appeared to be regret. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly as our mother rejoined the main group. We found a quiet corner in the study, the room where our father had once helped us with homework, and where family meetings had been held to discuss important decisions. The familiar leather chairs and shelves of legal and medical books created a fitting backdrop for the conversation we were about to have. "I owe you an apology," Brian began once we were seated. "I've been complicit in how you were treated all these years." I studied my brother's face, noting the lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there when we were younger. The golden child carried his own burdens, it seemed. "You were a child too," I said. "Neither of us created the dynamic." Brian shook his head. "But I benefited from it. I knew Mother was harder on you, that she compared us constantly. And I did nothing. I accepted the praise, the attention, the opportunities while watching you struggle for any recognition." His honesty surprised me. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps even continued condescension, but not this raw acknowledgement. "Do you know what the worst part is?" he continued, not waiting for my response. "I've been living my entire life trying to meet expectations that aren't even mine. Medical school specialization, research publications. It's all been about fulfilling the path laid out for me." "You don't enjoy being a neurosurgeon?" I asked, genuinely curious. He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it took me back to our childhood. I don't hate it. I'm good at it. But if I'm honest, I never chose it. It was chosen for me, and I was too afraid to question it. Unlike you, he added, meeting my eyes. You had the courage to walk away to find your own path. I've always envied that about you, even while I was being told to pity you. His words landed like puzzle pieces fitting into place, reshaping my understanding of our shared history. All these years I had seen Brian as the favored one, the successful one, never considering that his compliance might have been its own kind of cage. It's not too late, you know, I said gently, to make changes to pursue what actually fulfills you. He gave a small, sad smile. Easy for you to say. You don't have a mortgage on a house Mother helped select, or a marriage founded partly on shared medical careers, or a reputation in a field that's been built over a decade. No, I agreed, but I did start from scratch once. It was terrifying, and the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most worthwhile. We sat in contemplative silence for a moment, two adults reckoning with the complicated legacy of our upbringing. Your company, Brian said finally. It's really as successful as that article suggests. I nodded. More so, actually. That piece was published a few months ago, and we've expanded since then. And you built it all yourself from nothing. I had help. I acknowledged, thinking of Jennifer and the team I had assembled over the years. But yes, I started it from scratch with my own savings and vision. Brian shook his head in wonder. That's incredible, Sophie. Truly. And I'm sorry I wasn't there to see it happen to support you along the way. Maybe you can be part of what happens next, I suggested. Nexus is exploring applications in medical technology. Your insights could be valuable. The idea seemed to surprise him, but I could see it take root, offering a possibility he hadn't considered, a bridge between his world and mine. I'd like that, he said, a genuine smile replacing the professional mask he had worn throughout the evening. As we rejoined the party, I felt a shift in the family dynamic. Where earlier I had been the outsider, the disappointment to be pitied or ignored, now relatives were gravitating toward me, eager to hear about my company, my life in the city, my perspective on technology and business. The transformation was nearly comical in its completeness. Uncle Robert was now insisting I meet his son, a recent computer science graduate. Aunt Patricia wanted to know if I would speak at her daughter's school about women in technology. Even distant relatives who had barely acknowledged me earlier were finding reasons to strike up conversations. I handled it all with grace, neither reveling in the attention nor rejecting it outright. This wasn't about vindication or revenge. It was about finally being seen for who I actually was, not who my family had decided I should be. As the evening wound down, I found myself in conversation with Great Aunt Teresa, the nominal reason for the gathering. At 80, she was still sharp-minded and observant. You caused quite a stir tonight, she said with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. I haven't seen Elizabeth that flustered since she failed to get chief resident position 30 years ago. I couldn't help but laugh. That wasn't my intention. Perhaps not, Teresa said, patting my hand. But it was overdue nonetheless. I always knew you'd find your way, dear. You have your grandmother's spirit, not your mother's. Her words touched me deeply. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had been a warm, creative woman who encouraged my artistic interests before she passed away when I was 10. I had often wondered if my relationship with my mother might have been different had my grandmother lived longer. Thank you for seeing that in me, I said sincerely. Teresa's weathered hand squeezed mine. Sometimes the strongest act of rebellion is to become fully yourself despite what others expect. You've done that beautifully. As I prepared to leave that night, saying my goodbyes and exchanging contact information with relatives who suddenly wanted to stay connected, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly, at having finally broken free from the narrative my family had constructed around me. There was lingering pain from years of dismissal and criticism. There was cautious hope for new beginnings, particularly with Brian. And there was an unexpected sense of liberation. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's disappointment, allowing it to cast a shadow over my achievements. Now, standing in the driveway of my childhood home, I felt that weight lifting. Whether or not my mother ever truly accepted my choices no longer determined my worth. I had proven that to myself, and ultimately, that was what mattered most. Driving away from my hometown the next morning felt different from all the previous times I had made this journey. The landscape was the same, the route familiar, but I was returning to my life not as an escape, but as a choice, a positive affirmation rather than a retreat. Back at Nexus headquarters, I threw myself into work with renewed energy and clarity. The company was in a phase of exciting growth, expanding into new markets and developing innovations that pushed the boundaries of what AI-enhanced user experience could achieve. But now, alongside the professional drive that had always motivated me, I felt a personal evolution taking shape. The week after the family reunion, I invited Jennifer to dinner to share everything that had happened. Over plates of pasta at our favorite Italian restaurant, I recounted the dramatic revelations and confrontations, the painful words and tentative beginnings of reconciliation. "So your mother finally knows you're a tech mogul," Jennifer said with a satisfied smile when I finished. "How does it feel?" I considered the question carefully. "Freeing," I said finally. "Not because I need her approval, but because I no longer need to hide who I am and what I've built." The secret was becoming its own kind of burden. Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves end up becoming prisons. I'm proud of you for being willing to tear them down. "I had a good teacher," I replied, raising my glass in a small toast to her. In the months that followed, I began the careful process of rebuilding connections with my family, but on my own terms. Brian and I established a monthly video call, and to my surprise, he took me up on my offer to consult on Nexus's medical technology initiatives. His clinical perspective proved invaluable as we developed interfaces designed to improve patient care and physician workflow. My relationship with my mother remained complex. The decades of hurt and misunderstanding couldn't be erased in a single evening of revelations. But we were attempting something new, a relationship based on who we actually were rather than who we wished the other would be. Our conversations were sometimes awkward, sometimes tense, but they were more honest than they had ever been. One unexpected outcome of the family reunion was a clearer vision for Nexus's future. Reflecting on my own journey and the barriers I had faced, I established the Nexus Potential Scholarship designed to support young people pursuing unconventional paths in technology, particularly those facing familial or societal pressure to conform to more traditional careers. "Success shouldn't be defined by someone else's expectations," I explained at the scholarship launch event. "Innovation happens when people have the freedom to follow their unique vision." The program quickly gained attention in the tech community, attracting partners and additional funding that allowed us to expand its reach. Each time I reviewed applications and read the stories of young people determined to forge their own paths. Despite obstacles, I felt a profound connection to their struggles and a deep satisfaction in being able to support their journeys. My friendship with Jennifer deepened as well, evolving from a mentor-mentee relationship to a partnership of equals. When she decided to step back from day-to-day operations at her company to focus on strategic initiatives, she joined the Nexus board of directors, bringing her wealth of experience and wisdom to our growing enterprise. "You've built something remarkable here," she told me during a tour of our expanded offices. "Not just a successful company, but a place where people can bring their whole selves to work, where innovation isn't constrained by arbitrary expectations. That's rare and precious." Her words touched me deeply because they reflected exactly what I had set out to create. Not just a profitable business, but a community where people could thrive by following their authentic talents and interests. The following spring, I received an unexpected email from my mother. She was organizing a benefit for the hospital's research foundation and wanted to know if I would be willing to speak about technology's role in the future of healthcare. The invitation represented a significant shift, an acknowledgement of my expertise and success in a professional context she valued. After careful consideration, I accepted. The event brought me back to my hometown once more, but this time I arrived as an invited expert, rather than a disappointing daughter. My presentation on AI applications in medical diagnostics was well received, and afterwards several of my mother's colleagues approached me with questions and potential collaboration ideas. My mother watched from across the room, and when our eyes met, I saw something I had rarely witnessed growing up, a glimmer of genuine pride untainted by comparison or condition. It was a small moment but significant in its authenticity. That evening, as we shared a quiet dinner, just the two of us, she said something that surprised me. "I was wrong about you, Sophie. Not just about your career, but about who you are. I was so focused on the path I thought you should take that I couldn't see the extraordinary person you were becoming." The admission couldn't erase years of criticism and rejection, but it was a step toward healing that I hadn't expected. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. "I don't expect you to forgive everything," she continued, her voice uncharacteristically tentative. "But I hope we can build something new going forward." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. 2 years after the family reunion that had changed everything, I found myself standing on a stage at a major technology conference preparing to deliver the keynote address. Looking out at the audience of industry leaders, innovators, and aspiring technologists, I saw my journey with new clarity. The path had been neither straight nor easy. There had been failures and setbacks alongside the successes, moments of doubt as well as triumph. But each step, even the painful ones, had brought me to this place of purpose and fulfillment. True innovation, I told the audience, begins with the courage to define success on your own terms, to look beyond conventional wisdom and expectations, to find the unique contribution only you can make. In the front row, I could see Jennifer, her encouraging smile, a reminder of the power of mentorship and genuine support. Several rows back sat Brian, who had recently taken a sabbatical from surgery to explore medical education technology, finding a renewed passion in the intersection of his training and creative problem-solving. And to my surprise, in the back of the hall stood my mother, who had flown in without telling me. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but her presence there in my world, rather than expecting me to exist solely in hers, represented a profound shift. As I concluded my speech to enthusiastic applause, I was struck by the realization that the greatest freedom isn't in proving others wrong or even in achieving external success. It's in the liberation that comes from defining your own path, following your authentic purpose, and extending that same acceptance to others. Sometimes the most challenging journeys lead us exactly where we need to be, not to the place others think we should go, but to the place our hearts have always known was right. The road may be difficult, the obstacles numerous, but the destination, a life lived on your own terms, is always worth the journey. Have you ever had to stand up for your own path in life despite family pressure? What helped you stay true to yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Remember, your worth isn't determined by others' expectations, but by the courage to live authentically. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to follow your own path wherever it may lead.